I know it's a cliche, but it's true. Good UI and UX design should work similar to invisible VFX. They should go unnoticed. When you interact with software or a website or whatever the product might be and the UI is good, there's zero friction. If it's bad though, you're in for a wild ride. And lately, unfortunately, I've been having more and more of these bad UI interactions. It might just be me, but I get the feeling that the past couple of years, a lot of companies have gotten lazier when it comes to UI and UX. So this video aims to mainly catalog some of these bad experiences and of course poke some fun at the expense of big companies. Let's go! We'll start with the bundle of joy that is Netflix. I could do a whole video about Netflix alone, but for now, let's just focus on the most glaring issues. And the first one has to be the watch list interaction. Cleaning up this list will require you to have the patience of a saint. Here's what happens. You're quite deep into your list and you decide you want to get rid of a show. So you click on it and remove it from the list. So far so good. Now watch what happens when you go out of that show and into your list. The UI sends you all the way back to the beginning. So now if you want to continue cleaning up, you need to scroll all the way through, find the next show you want to remove, and then repeat this frustrating interaction over and over again. I have no clue who thought that this was a good idea, but it's been like that for years. The solution of course is super obvious. You just let the viewer go back to where they were. Apple does it correctly on Apple TV's movie watch list. You go into your list, find the movie you want to remove, and when you go back, you just continue from where you left off. But that's not the end of it. Cleaning up Netflix's watch list gets even more complicated, and that's because Netflix changes the covers of movies and shows as you're going through your list. So it's extremely easy to lose track of where you are. I'm aware that this interaction is very much intentional and it's a way for Netflix to find the visual that will intrigue the viewer, but here's the thing. This UX decision is not really serving the user. It deliberately confuses them in order to serve the company's interest. More watch time. Netflix has a ton of these bad interactions, but we have more companies to roast. You would expect a company with Apple's resources to have the sleekest and absolute best UI and UX in the industry, and in a lot of cases that is true. But the past few years I've noticed Apple getting a little bit too sloppy. I'm not sure if it's because the design team has to juggle a lot of projects or if it's because they're losing talent, but iOS 15 and OS X have quite a few bad UI and UX interactions. Let's have a look at mobile Safari. Tons of articles have been written about Safari's bad redesign, and most of it is true, but I want to focus on a couple of things I haven't seen anywhere else. For example, can you find the tab that has the Rotten Tomatoes site? No matter how hard you look, you won't find it. And that's because with iOS 15, Apple changed the way tabs work, and now the current tab you're on can be completely hidden from all other open tabs. Not being able to see where you are seems like a huge oversight. The other thing you can immediately notice from this example is how difficult it is to identify the tab you're on even if that tab is visible. Now that you know where to look, it's a little bit easier, but let's suppose you were browsing on the site for quite some time, so your focus wasn't on the tab bar. You would have a hard time identifying the Enable tab, and that's because there's so little contrast between the tab you're on and all the other open tabs. Thankfully, after a lot of user outcry, the behavior can be changed, but something like this shouldn't be available in the first place. This is a classic example of prioritizing aesthetics over usability. This interface looks good on a screenshot and demos really well in presentations, but when it comes to actually using the interface, the UI completely fails to deliver the experience the user deserves. This UI is the definition of form over function, and we have a ton of examples like that in OS X as well. UI that demos well, but in actuality it's a pain to use. I've been working with iOS 15 ever since the first beta, so I've been using it day in and day out for months now. Safari's UI still trips me up to this day. Another thing I didn't expect to see from Apple is UI consistencies. Usually they're quite good about it, but sometimes they fail in a spectacular way. Let's take the red button on every OS X window. It's been established for years now that the red button closes a window, the yellow button minimizes it, and the green one maximizes the window. Every once in a while though, Apple likes to break that convention just to spice things up. For example, when you close the System Preferences window, you actually quit the app, you don't just close the window. Seeing that, some apps are now following in Apple's footsteps, and in some cases the red button will quit the app. So there will be cases where one app might close a window and another one will quit it. But the most egregious use of the button can be seen in the Music app. When the player is in its compact state, hitting the red button doesn't close the window. Instead, it acts as a toggle and opens up the default state of the window, which is a complete disregard of Apple's own conventions. What is furthermore infuriating is that the behavior of the red button is inconsistent even within the Music app itself. So when the window is large, the red button will close the window, but when it's small, it will expand it. That is some crazy logic. Another type of inconsistency can be seen in iOS. Let's do a simple math calculation in Spotlight. On the iPhone, when you tap on the result, the calculator app will open up so you can further do more calculations. Let's try and do the same on the iPad. This time a web page will open up and not the calculator app, and that's because the iPad has no calculator app. It's been 11 years since the launch of the first iPad, and Apple still doesn't have a first-party app for this basic functionality. In interviews, they've mentioned that they're trying to figure out the best way to bring this functionality onto the iPad, but I think 11 years is enough time to figure out how to build a nice calculator. Instead, they chose not to only be inconsistent throughout their ecosystem, but also offer an inferior experience to the user. Of course, one could find a calculator app on the App Store, but that's going to be a tough task. It will require digging through apps that either ask for a subscription or apps full of ads. Definitely not the user experience any company would like to offer. By the way, if you want a good calculator app, look no further than pCalc Lite. The exact same thing happens with the weather app, or should I say the lack of a weather app on the iPad. There is a widget, but when you press it, you get the same behavior as with the calculator app. On the iPhone, iOS sends you to the weather app, but on the iPad it sends you to a website. Another example of bad UI has to be Apple's Health app. Here's a really simple example. Let's say I want to check how many kilometers I did the past month. I go into the Month tab, and the only thing I see is the monthly average. The only way to get the total for the month is by adding up all the days one by one, which is ridiculous. This is a really basic functionality, but for whatever reason, it's just not there. Or if it is there, it further showcases how bad the UI is. And by the way, it's been like that for years, so I'm not expecting this revolutionary feature to be added anytime soon. But that's enough Apple bashing for one video. Let's check Apple's competitor, Google. Let's take material design as an example. For years, they've used this custom UI in all their apps in their effort to unify the experience across desktop and mobile. A good idea brand-wise, but Google's apps on iOS felt completely alien because they didn't use any of the conventions and design language of the OS. Thankfully, this year they've decided to switch to Apple's UI kit, but it shouldn't have taken this long. Providing a user experience consistent to the underlying OS should be a no-brainer. Another frustrating UX blunder has to be how Google handles app switching. Even though the iPad and iPhone can serve the contents of the YouTube Studio website, Google performs a check when the user clicks the Studio button. And if the YouTube Studio is installed, it will open that instead. No matter how hard you try, you won't be able to access the page. The only way to stay on the website and have the web page served is to completely delete the app. This is beyond bonkers, and it also goes against UI's core principle of efficiency. Can the user perform the task in the most simple and direct way? In this case, it's a solid no. Google strips the user from choice and instead picks the most complex action. On the surface, it might look like it benefits the user, but it actually doesn't. If I wanted to open the app, I would just open the app myself. Considering that several stats served on the website are not shown on the app makes Google's decision even more baffling. The last thing I would like to mention is 1Password. As amazing as this password manager is, it has one insanely horrible and annoying UI behavior. Let's say we're on a website and we need to fill out a text field. Here's what happens. The 1Password interface is drawn right underneath the OS's pop-up. So even if you wanted to pick from 1Password's options, you cannot. But even worse than that, 1Password overrides the OS's shortcuts. So if, for example, I want to navigate the OS's pop-up with the arrow keys instead of 1Password, I just cannot. 1Password's pop-up will be triggered instead. The only way for the user to select the OS's pop-up is to select it with a mouse. I'm sure the developers and designers of 1Password have stumbled on this issue before, but it's been like that for years now. On the surface, these examples might look harmless, but they can be a point of friction in our day-to-day interactions with software. And in some cases, they might make software extremely difficult to understand and work with, which is quite common in industry-specialized applications. So, next time you work with an app that makes you feel like a complete idiot, think again. You're not an idiot. You're probably dealing with a poorly thought-out UI. And don't get me started on banking apps and kiosks for public transportation tickets. The bad UI and UX there should be taught on design schools. I would definitely love to hear though your bad experiences with poorly thought out UI. Let me know in the comments below, and if there's a lot of interest, I could do a second round of UI fails. And maybe, just maybe, some of these companies will decide to do something about it. If you want to learn more about the subject, be sure to check out the books in the description below. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.